Thank you, Julie. Oh, I'm so happy to be here with all of you, and I've gotten to meet several of you in the room this morning, which is so great. You know, I look out at this room, and I see such bright, accomplished, successful, powerhouse women, and 2 men, yeah, all right. But research would say that over half of us have higher stress than we did last year. And that only a third of us are engaged in our work. Over half of us don't even feel safe at work. And that only 16% of us feel that we are paid fairly. And the gender gap continues to widen, something Lou and I were talking about in senior leadership as women leave the workforce faster than we're promoted. And yet, we persist. We continue to show up on Zoom calls while balancing raising children and aging parents and household responsibilities and all these things that tend to fall on women. We continue to prioritize our self-care and our mental health, although I don't know about you, but my morning meditations look more like this, which has me showing up at work feeling more like this. We navigate global pandemics. We figure out how to have Teams calls with digital avatars. How creepy is that? We're coming face to face with AI and what that means, and yet we persist. We continue to show up every day saying we can do this, only to hear some whispers of who does she think she is? I have been on the receiving end of who does she think she is my entire career. And it's no wonder to me that American Ferrera got an Oscar nom for her monologue in Barbie about the impossibility of being a career woman. Who is leading this mess? Now look, I'm an optimist, so we're not gonna have a pity party for an hour, but we have got to interrupt this cycle. We cannot continue going with the flow here because the flow is going somewhere where we do not want to go. We really need a new type of leader, a more authentic, human-centric kind of leader. And us as women, we're naturally, wired around some vulnerability and empathy and some of the things we'll talk about today. So we actually have a unique advantage to show up as these authentic, human-centric leaders that the world so desperately needs. And that is what we're going to talk about today. Now, authenticity is all about deep self-awareness, really understanding self, really knowing self. The problem is that we have some blind spots when it comes to looking in the mirror. HBR did a study. 95% of people think they're self-aware. In actuality, only about 15% are. And so we need some more objective scientific data to really understand and see what's going on beneath the surface. And luckily there are tools to do that. Now at Wipfli, we use a lot of different data instruments. The predictive index is one of them. And if you take nothing else away from this morning with me, take this. If you are not using some kind of objective people data, you are operating blind. It doesn't have to be the PI, but make sure you're using something that gives you true insight into human behavior and people. Otherwise, we're operating blind. So the predictive index has been around since the 50s, and it's been administered millions of times across tens of thousands of organizations. It's undergone 500 validity studies that shows that it measures what it purports to measure and is free of bias. And the PI answers one very fundamental question. Why do we behave the way we behave? Now, we're really going to dig into this today because every human being has drives. And those drives in us create needs. And the behaviors that come out are simply an expression of trying to get our needs met. So very often we're just reacting to the behavior, either our own kind of reactions or the behavior we're experiencing from someone else, but that's the output. If we can measure the drives, we can really understand the needs and ultimately be able to better understand and predict the behavior that's going to show up. And we are going to spend some real time digging in here, and I just want to express the reason it's so important is that this is the lens through which we are putting everything. We are filtering any decision, information, anything we're doing through this lens. I was talking to Adi this morning about even just our realities, our shared realities. Half of it is based kind of in the physical virtual world in front of us, and then half of it is just in our own minds through our own lens. So we're not even experiencing the same reality. So this is 50% of what we're looking at is through our own lens. And if we don't have deep self-awareness here, we can have blind spots, we can have a distorted reality that leads to all kinds of problems. And that's why we're really going to dive in here. Now, most of you took the PI prior to coming, but if you didn't, there are table tents at your tables, or you can scan this. Find a quiet 5 minutes today, it's all it takes, to take it, and you'll get your results sent right to you, okay? We're going to dive into it. So, PI, the way it answers why do we behave the way we behave, it measures 4 fundamental drives. The A drive, dominance, or the drive to exert one's influence or control on people or events. The B factor, extroversion, the drive to connect socially with others. The C drive, patience, the drive for consistency and stability. And the D drive, formality, the drive to conform to rules and structure. We're going to dive into each. Reading a PI pattern. So PI is laid out in standard deviations because it has been administered so many times. And so we can also see how we relate around the population. This midpoint here, where you see the black triangle, anything to the right of the midpoint is a higher expression of the drive. Anything to the left of the midpoint is a lower expression of the drive. Anything that falls within that first sigma on either side, that's where the majority of the population sits. When you start to get out to the second sigmas, you share that strength of drive with about 14 to 16% of the population. And then when you get all the way out into the third sigmas, you only share that strength of drive with about 2 to 3% of the population. The wider the pattern, the more strongly those drives are going to be expressed, the more predictable the behavior, and the harder it is to change. Also important to note, every PI pattern is absolutely beautiful. One is not good, bad, right, wrong, right? It is what it is. And then the 3 graphs that we look at. That top graph, the self graph, this is really kind of who we are at our core. It's what PI calls a stable construct, which means it doesn't change much over time. In fact, if you have taken the PI multiple times, the first time you take it is always going to be the most accurate on the self graph, because when we take it again, some bias, unconscious or not, can creep in. But by the time we're about 18 or so, our personality is fairly hardwired. Now, it can change based on significant life events, but again, pretty much we are who we are. This is a stable construct. The second graph measures our adaptations, how we're adapting to the current environment. And this does change because the current environment changes, right? So this is good for about, a 3 to 6 month slice of time that we can look at. We're going to dive into both of those today. The third graph is simply a combination of the first two. It's kind of the you I'm going to experience. You're some version of who you naturally are and the adaptations you're making. All right, so let's dive into each of these factors and really think about how they show up behaviorally, how they drive us to do what we do. All right, so the dominance factor, the A factor, right? The drive to exert one's influence on people or events. If I have a high expression of dominance, I am a high A, I have a real need for independence. I need to put my own individual stamp on something. I've got to have control over my activities. I need autonomy. I need opportunities to take the lead, to compete. I thrive on competition. And so the behaviors you see show up as an expression to get those needs met, people who are really independent, They challenge the status quo. They're comfortable with conflict. They're working autonomously, and they tend to deal with adversity well. Now, conversely, if I'm low in dominance, my need is not of this kind of me, I gotta put my individual stamp on something. It's more of we, it's more of the collective. I need encouragement and reassurance. I need harmony. I need strong leaders that I can follow. I need a supportive team-like environment, and I need freedom from competition. That's gonna make me more uncomfortable. And so the behaviors you see show up as an expression to get those needs met, sort of the ultimate team player, right? Very cooperative, accommodating, harmony-seeking, collaborative with others, promoting the collective efforts, the team win. Now think about how you see dominance show up in the workplace. Think about how you see it show up in yourself, whether you have a high or low expression. Here's an example of a pattern, right, with a high A, high dominance. Adi this morning had no problem saying that she wanted to be seated at a different table to meet new people because, you know, she's gonna take the reins on where she sits. She's got a high A. And it was a great expression of that high dominance, taking the reins. All right, let's look at the B factor, extroversion, the drive to connect socially with others. To be clear, this is not, do I like people or do I not like people? This is, am I fundamentally driven at my human core to connect socially with the other humans or not? Okay? If I'm a high B, high expression of extroversion, I need to work with the other people. I need the humans, right? I need social acceptance. I need to be liked. I'm a 3 Sigma high B. I need all of you to like me, okay? If you don't, please don't tell me. You know, we need prestige, status. We need to look good in front of others. Don't want to embarrass the high B. We need visible signs of recognition. And so the behaviors you see show up from people with a high B, they're outgoing, they're people-oriented, they're sociable, they're really engaging. If you're standing next to a high B in Starbucks, they are talking to you about their order, what they're ordering, right? They're going through everything. We ideate in real time. Now, if I'm a low B, right? I have a low expression. Again, it's not I don't like people. It's not I can't be the life of the party. But my need is that of introspection. I need time to really reflect. I need time to trust others. I need freedom from office politics, and I still need recognition. I'm a human being, but I need more private, personal recognition. That's what's going to motivate those behaviors. And so behaviors you see show up as an expression to get those needs met are people who are introspective, you know, people who are reflective, people who are analytical. They have to think before acting. They're not ready to talk things through until we've already had some private time to think, and can be more straightforward in the communication. So think about how you see this show up in the workplace, either in yourself or in a colleague. This is an example of a pattern that shows a high B. This morning at my hotel, the chef, the cook came out and started talking to all the tables. How are you liking your breakfast? You enjoying your breakfast? And I was like, that's a high B right there. He doesn't need to come out of the kitchen, but he needs to come out of the kitchen because he needs the social interaction. He can't be back there all day. All right, let's think about the C factor, patience. Now, sometimes people get confused because the word patience, we have a lot of different ideas around it. This is a drive for consistency and stability. So if I am high in patience, I need to be able to work at a steady clip, okay? I need a stable work environment. I need familiar surroundings, familiarity, and I need a supportive family-like team. So behaviors you see as an expression to get those needs met from high patience people are steady Eddie, right? Kind of unflappable, really consistent and approachable. They handle routine well, they can listen, they have all the time to listen. Conversely, if I'm low in patience, my need is that of variety. I gotta switch it up lest I get bored, right? I have a need for mobility and freedom from repetition. I have a need to work on work where my results can be achieved quickly. I need to see that win quickly. And so the behaviors you see as an expression of getting those needs met are people who are really driving, super proactive, right? Operating at fast pace, sense of urgency, real quick to act. Can be intense at times just from our own drive of sort of that low patience, and always multitasking, right? If you see someone just multitasking in a meeting, always doing those things, I'm like, oh, there's a low C probably. So again, here's an expression of a low C. Think about how you see that show up in the workplace. C factor is one of the most interesting ones because people, based on where you are in the spectrum, actually experience time differently. It's one of the most common sort of misinterpretations of behavior that we see. Right? A leader may be low C and say, okay, leave a meeting, we need this done. She thinks in the next hour. Well, her high C colleague thinks end of the week is fine. They're not lazy, they are experiencing time differently. And so this is where clarity of realistic expectations, deadlines, things like that come into play. And then lastly, the D factor, formality. Again, the drive to conform to rules and structure. Now, if I am high in D, high in formality, I need clear expectations. I need to know the rules of the road. I need structure. I need freedom from risk of error. I need to not make a mistake. And so the behaviors you see show up to get those needs met are people who are very diligent, really thorough, really precise in their work. They're process, system driven, they're cautious, they're gonna be more risk averse, right? From that freedom of risk of error. Now, if I am low in D, if I'm low formality, and rules are meant to be broken, I need freedom from all of that rigid structure. I need opportunity to delegate the details and the logistics, right? I need informality. I need freedom of expression. I'm gonna feel way too controlled in that tight kind of structure. And so the behaviors you see show up from a low D trying to get those needs met are people who are informal, people who are really flexible, spontaneous, non-conforming, right? They can sort of challenge the status quo a bit, and they can be more tolerant of uncertainty because we don't necessarily need, the roadmap. We don't need the clarity. So think about how you see a D show up. How do you see formality, either in yourself or in others that you work with? This is an example of a high D. A high D is going to want to read the 100-page technical manual on PI to really understand the science and validity before they even listen to any of this. Funny enough, the only skepticism and pushback sometimes I get around people data is from a high D. And I always have a personal giggle because, of course, that is an exact expression of a high D, of a behavior of a high D. So the 4 factors are one thing. But then we get juicier and sort of into more nuance when we start looking at factor combinations, how one factor relates to another. This can serve as an amplifier or an accelerator of other factors and gets really, really interesting. So 2 of my favorite factor combinations to look at is, one is the AB factor combination. Kind of shows, are we more task or more people oriented? So on the surface, these 2 patterns look pretty similar. They're both high A and high B, both high dominance, high extroversion, and they're both low C, low D, low patience, low formality. But behaviorally, these 2 people are going to show up differently. So when push comes to shove, that top graph, the A over B, that person's dominance, their sort of need to achieve, need to win, need to get their goal is higher than their B drive, their need for social interaction. So they may sacrifice a relationship in order to achieve their goal. Whereas that bottom graph, when push comes to shove, their drive for extroversion and the social connection is more than their drive for dominance, so they may give up their goal to preserve the relationship. In a sales role, for instance, shows up very, very differently. Another one is the AD factor combination. So this is the drive for dominance versus the drive for formality. I like to think of it as sort of the drive to get it done versus the drive to get it done right. And this can show us our risk tolerance. So in that top graph, the A is over the D. The drive to get it done is stronger than the drive to get it done right. So this person's gonna be much more open to risk. They'll cannonball right on in. The bottom graph, a D over A, the drive to get it done right is over the drive to get it done. More risk averse. So let's look at some trends in this room. I pulled highest factors. I love just looking at what is the highest driving factor. I like to think of it as kind of the emergency alarm in the brain, right? If push comes to shove, shit hits the fan, what is driving our behavior? So 19% of us in this room are highest A, highest dominance. 26% of us in this room are highest B, highest extroversion. 19% highest C, highest patience. And the large majority at 37% highest D, highest formality. So what does that mean? The highest A's, when push comes to shove, they're gonna take the reins. They're gonna take the reins on the situation. They're gonna say, I'm gonna control this, just, you know, I got this, okay? I'm leading the way, you follow. The highest B's, it's like, where are my people at? Okay, I need to know my relationships are good, I got my people okay, this is my priority. The highest C's, wait it out, stay calm, right? No rash decisions, let's see how this unfolds. And the highest D's, pull out the rule book. What's the process we need to follow, right? What do the rules say? Really interesting, as I was learning the PI, I ran it on my family, and each of us have a different driver, and I'm like, that's exactly it. This is exactly what everybody does when it happens. All right, so let's look at some more trends in this room. And because we are all here to get better, I want to look at it through the lens of where some of these trends might result in some ineffective leadership behaviors that may get in our way. Any factor can be a pro or a con. Any factor can produce effective or ineffective behaviors. I mean, I like to think of it as sort of good day, bad day, right? We all have good days, we all have bad days. Now, whether it's producing an ineffective or effective behavior is often based in deep self-awareness, which is why we're doing this. So let's shed some light on where we may naturally produce potentially ineffective behaviors based on some trends in this room. So we mentioned 26% of us are highest B in this room, which means we have socially driven profiles. That means 74% of us aren't driven by social connection. Now, again, that does not mean the large majority of us in this room don't like people, we don't care about our teams at all. But it means we are not driven. What is motivating our behavior is not the social connection. So if we're connecting with someone, we need something. We usually need something. We need some numbers, we need a report, we need an update. Well, if we're working with someone who needs the connection, we can come across transactional, a bit transactional in our approach. And so good to understand, you know, the motivating needs of the people that we're working with and where we're coming from. 79% of us in this room are high A or high D. And let me tell you about high A's and high D's. High A's and high D's, we know the right way things need to be done. Of course, the problem is, right, if we're working with other high A's and D's who also know the way that things need to be done and have a different idea of the way it needs to be done, right, this often drives a very common area of conflict. Now, it's worth noting that based on those drives, it's coming from a different place. And often, and this is why we need the objective data, because often it's misinterpreted where it's coming from. The high A's, our self-confidence comes from who we are. And the high D's, as high D's, it comes from what we know. Okay, so it's coming from a different place. It's a different drive that's motivating that behavior, but it can show up behaviorally in a similar way. But again, important for us to have that objective information because we understand what's driving it, and ultimately we can start to see what levers we need to pull to start motivating behavior, either in ourselves or others. 80% of us in this room are high C, high D, or D over A. So what does that mean? That means that the majority of us in this room may struggle with change or ambiguity. The high C's, high patience, you know, it's like, let's wait it out, okay? I need some stable environment. This is feeling a bit changed and chaotic. The high D's, clarity of expectations, clarity of what I'm doing. The D over A is risk averse, don't want to make a mistake. Now, what's constant in our world? Change and ambiguity, right? This is what we're constantly dealing with as leaders. So again, good to understand that we may have some natural aversion to that. And let's look at one more. 82% of us in this room are low A, high B, or high C. What does that mean? The majority of us in this room may avoid tough conversations and confronting issues head on, which is obviously a fundamental leadership behavior, a leadership task that we need to be able to do. Those low A's are all about that harmony and are going to tend to avoid conflict. Those high B's just want to keep everything all good, like, right? We don't want to mess up those waters. And those high C's, again, let's just wait it out and see if this resolves itself. Who cares? Why does this matter? I mean, why is it so important that we really, truly understand ourselves at these deep levels? I'm wearing a bracelet today. Oh my gosh, I seriously need my eyes checked. And it says, trust the process. But we don't just blindly trust a process that we think is broken. We need to trust in something that we believe is true. And so only when we authentically show up as our true selves, only then can people trust us. And we cannot lead people unless they trust us first. Now, fair warning, as Julie mentioned, I have a 6-year-old, so there are going to be some Disney references up in here, okay? When Aladdin says, "Do you trust me?" that trust had to already be established for Jasmine to literally leap off of a building onto the magic carpet. So how do we start fostering trust now so that it's there? So that it's already established when we need our team to take a leap of faith. When we need them to follow our lead. So building trust, authenticity is one piece of it, but it's not the full picture. It's kind of a 3-legged stool here. Building trust, authenticity. I experience the real you. Empathy, I believe you care about me and my success. And logic, I know you can do it. Your reasoning and judgment are sound. So we're going to dive into each of these. With authenticity, one is understanding self, but it's also being true to self. Now we're humans, we're smart. We adapt, right? It's how we've survived as a species for so long. But when do the adaptations that we make move us too far away from our authentic selves? I was talking with several of you in this room about this. This is my PI that I took back in 2021, and PI measures the adaptations we're making, how we are adapting to our current environment. I think it's one of the most interesting things it measures. Now, again, we all adapt, and some adaptations are easier to make than others. Some adaptations take a lot of energy. Some adaptations are exhausting, uncomfortable, and even untenable. Any adaptation that flips the midpoint, meaning it's going from high to low or low to high, that's a harder adaptation to make. Any adaptation that's moving multiple sigmas, going from a 3 sigma to a 1 sigma, whatever it might be, That's a harder adaptation to make. And some factors tend to be harder. The A and the D factor in particular tend to be a bit harder adaptations to make. So here's me, let's look at this. I am naturally, that top graph, I am naturally a high A. Okay, I'm a 2 sigma high dominant, meaning, man, I'm all about putting my mark on something, put my stamp on something, taking the reins, owning it, running autonomously. I was getting signals from my environment, you see in this bottom graph, moving to a 1 sigma low A, that I needed to be much more of a team player, way more collaborative with others. Let's look at the D factor. Naturally, I'm a 3 sigma low D, meaning I only share my aversion with tight rules and formality and structure with about 2 to 3% of the population. I am informal, flexible, kind of spontaneous, right? Getting signals from my environment that I need to be a 2 sigma high D, that I need to conform more. I need to really play by the rules. I need to be more structured, more diligent, more precise. These are tough adaptations to make. Now, I actually took this right as I resigned from my role. So it shows it can sometimes be untenable. Now, it doesn't always have to be untenable. What's beautiful about the adaptations we make is this is changeable, right? That second graph is changeable because the current environment can change. And so sometimes just with self-awareness, I mean, sometimes I think, man, if I had just had this PI before I resigned, right? To really start looking at just self-awareness. Why do I feel like I need to be making these adaptations? Do I? Is that true? You know, can I understand the current environment better? Can I shift the current environment in some way? 75% of us in this room are making at least one significant adaptation. And so I encourage everyone to be thinking about why. Like, let's get curious. You know, why do we feel like we need to be making this adaptation? Why do we feel like we need to show up in a different way than we're naturally wired, right? And only you can answer, right? Is it taking me too far away from my authentic self? Do I need to kind of bring that back a little bit more to just who I authentically am? So, authenticity, understanding oneself, being true to yourself. Then there's also vulnerability, which is showing self, right? Showing up, being willing to expose and express our true self. Even in situations that can be sensitive, uncomfortable, risky, which is already going to be naturally a bit uncomfortable to the majority of us high Ds in the room. So let's talk about vulnerability. I think a great example of vulnerability is Alan Mulally. Alan Mulally is the former CEO of Ford and Boeing. And he started the Business Plan Review, which is basically vulnerability at scale, kind of systematize vulnerability, transparency within an organization, where everyone knows what's going on, everything is either color-coded green, yellow, or red. Green obviously means we're good, red means we're bad, yellow means we're getting there. The goal to change reds to yellows, yellows to greens. And when Alan first took over Ford, Ford was in the tank. It was bad. They were predicted to lose $17 billion that year. And so at the first all hands, he had seen the data come in, everything was green. So Alan gets up to everyone and says, hey, what's going on? What do we need to know? And it's just total crickets. Nobody says anything. Now, you have to understand they were coming from a culture of no vulnerability. I mean, if you spoke up, you were mysteriously disappeared at the next meeting, right? So Alan says, all right, you're telling me we're going to lose $17 billion. Is there anything not going well? Something wrong? So he shows up at the next meeting. What do I need to know? What's going wrong? What are the areas of special attention? Again, crickets, everything's green, everything's good. So Alan's undeterred. He comes to the next meeting. Hey, all right, tell me what's wrong. What do we need to do? Everything's still green here. And finally, one leader kind of raises his hand, and everyone's like, oh, damn, he's gone. He's out of here. And Alan starts to clap because he wanted to show, like, I'm celebrating this openness, this vulnerability, this transparency. And so, the leader says, actually, I'm gonna have to shut down production over here. We've got this problem with this actuator. And then this other guy in the meeting says, we had that problem over, on this line. And then this other leader, she stands up and says, you're gonna need some engineers on that. I'll put some people on it. And within a matter of minutes, they started working through it. They worked through it on the shop floor, and then it was back up and running. So the next meeting, Alan comes and says, all right, tell me what's going on. What do we need to know? What's not working? Every hand up. Everything was red. And he said, at that moment, that's when he really knew they were going to be able to turn Ford around. Because you can't manage a secret, right? We can't, if we're just fronting and not showing up real, it's really hard to manage that. Now, I had the privilege of getting to know Alan. We published this book when I was at Forbes Books, and we implemented the BPR, and I'm telling you, it's a vulnerable place to be, to show up week after week and show all your peers, like your red, yellows, greens. That's the thing about vulnerability. Brene Brown says, the difficult thing is that vulnerability is the first thing I look for in you, and the last thing I'm willing to show you. In you, it's courage and daring. In me, it's weakness. We feel that as women, right? Vulnerability, weakness. In the great words of Raya and the Last Dragon, as she is telling people, asking people to trust her, she says, then let me take the first step. We have to be willing to be vulnerable and show up vulnerably if we are going to expect somebody else to do it. Only when we're vulnerable first can they say, I experienced the real you, so I believe that I can show you the real me. Without fear of retribution, without fear of judgment, without fear of this hanging over my head later, right? All right, so that's authenticity, really understanding self. Now there's empathy. How do we understand and connect with others? Now, I'm talking about deep, fundamental understanding of other people, right? Not just basic surface level. Like, how do we really get to understand somebody else? Really kind of walk in their shoes. I'm going to tell you a quick story about Derek Snook, who I think just embodies empathy and the kind of empathy I'm talking about. Derek grew up in beautiful, privileged suburb of Charleston, South Carolina. He went to the Citadel, got a great education. All of his peers are going out getting impressive jobs, and Derek decides he wants to dedicate his life to helping underprivileged. But he asks himself, can we ever really solve people's problems from a distance? And so while all of his peers were going out and getting these impressive corporate jobs, Derek decided to become homeless. He decided to move into a homeless shelter to really understand the people that he wanted to serve. So he moves into a homeless shelter thinking he's gonna experience this. Not what he experienced. He ended up experiencing a bunch of hard-working day laborers. And he thought to himself, how is a hard-working day laborer homeless? So what did he do? Got a job as a day laborer. It's like, I'm gonna really understand what's driving, what's happening, what's going on in these people's worlds. And he starts having conversations. What's going on? We're doing back-breaking work. How are we homeless? Then they get into conversations. Oh, well, the contractor's paying $15 an hour. The staffing agency takes half of it right off the bat. By the time we get it post-tax, it's just not enough. So he ends up starting a staffing agency to pass on the profits all to the day laborer to help end homelessness, to help impact homelessness. And he went on and gave a TED Talk, wrote a book about what living homeless taught him. And as all of his friends are buying their first houses, this is the house Derek just bought. Because he wants to continue to live in the shoes of the people that he is serving. Now, Look, I'm not suggesting that we are going to be able to get this in the depths, in the shoes of all of our team members, of our employees, of our clients. But it sure as heck beats an employee engagement survey, right? It sure as heck beats a quick, how was your weekend, at the start of a one-on-one. So how do we connect more deeply and understand people more fundamentally faster? Again, we can rely on people data for that. Because too often we're just looking at the observed behaviors, right? What's on the surface. But we are completely blind without that data to what is underneath the surface, what is really driving those behaviors. And this is absolutely, misinterpretation of behavior is what erodes trust. So this is going to get in our way over and over and over again if we are not understanding where people are coming from to really be able to understand and predict that behavior. I often think of this as like if someone cuts you off in traffic. In fact, someone did cut me off in traffic when I got into DC and was coming to the airport and was leaving the airport. Someone swerved, honked. It's like, well, I know what I think about that person, right? But what if I knew that was a mother racing her sick child to the ER? I would feel very differently about that behavior because I know what's driving it. I know what's motivating that behavior. So we can look at the PI based on just highest drives. We usually look at it like this when we're looking at teams. In fact, Marcy, who leads our strategy at Wipfli, she was saying she was working with a new team at Wipfli, and just she could tell real quick they weren't speaking the same language. And the first thing she did is like, pull up this chart. I need to see everybody on the team so I see where people are coming from. Okay, so this just looks at what are those highest driving motivators? What is motivating the behavior? So down here in this quadrant, results and discipline. These are our highest A's and D's. So people driven by dominance and formality. And this is all about results and goals. Okay? All about, these people are driven, they're competitive. The focus is on tasks and execution. This is their perspective. This is the lens, right? This is the language they're speaking. Now up in innovation and agility, these are our highest A's and B's. And follow along as we do this, plot yourself and to see what quadrant you would go into, okay? Your two highest factors. So innovation and agility, highest A's and B's, so driven by dominance and extroversion. And these people are all about pursuing new innovations, right? Open to risk, willing to try different things. They're acting quickly and assertively. They're moving on the next thing. Again, this is their lens, their priority, their perspective through which they're filtering everything. Then we've got teamwork and human experience up there. These are our highest B's and C's, people driven by extroversion and patience. This is all about collaboration, all about the employee experience, all about relationships, supporting others' development and growth. This is their language. It's their perspective, their priority, the lens through which they're putting everything. And then finally, process and precision. These are our highest C's and D's, highest patience and highest formality. These are our analytical people, well organized, all about efficiency, all about process and predictability. This is their lens, this is their language. So, this is a classic example of contrasting styles. She's from Mars, she's from Venus. They're talking different languages. They're coming at things from a totally different perspective. Now, without self-awareness, the person down in process and precision, she may be looking at the innovation agility person saying she is riding around like a wild cowgirl, just completely opening the company to risk, just so distractible, chasing the next shiny thing. The innovation agility person may be looking down at process and precision going, she's hamstringing me. She's slowing down my project. She's taking the wind out of my sails. Now, the beautiful thing is they need each other, right? One is strong where the other is weak. And so with awareness, really understanding what the needs of the other people are, where they're coming from, what's motivating and driving their behavior, we can start to speak the same language. Now this is an example, these two, of overlapping styles. So we may think, hey, we're the same, right? We speak the same language. Bueno, good. Well, not necessarily. We speak the same language, but here, these are our highest A's and D's. What did I tell you about high A's and D's? We know the right way things need to be done. Well, if these two people have different ideas of the way things need to be done, and strong subject matter expertise, right? They're driven by their confidence and what they know. This can be classic conflict. I've worked with clients that were almost at physical violence in this same quadrant. And just the self-awareness around, we want the same things. We're actually driven by the same things. We both want to win and we want to do it the right way. We just need to come together on how that needs to be done, right? That awareness. When we start to really see what's driving somebody else, what's motivating them at their core, what their needs are, we can see them. We can really understand where they're coming from. And only then can they say, oh man, I believe you care about me and my success. So if authenticity is all about understanding self, and empathy is all about understanding others, logic is all about understanding the situation. Now, as leaders, we are faced with situations, different situations all the time, right? One situation that seems to be on everyone's mind lately is AI. AI, the impact of AI, and as leaders, how is this going to impact us? How is it going to impact our teams? And I thought it would be fun to just look at this situation based on this framework that we just looked at. But instead, let's plot the work. Let's plot the work that's done in each of these quadrants. So in results and discipline, right, this is all about execution. Market research, go-to-market strategy, content creation, data analytics. Up in innovation and agility, all about vision. What's the strategy, the mission, expansion opportunities, disruption opportunities? In teamwork and employee experience, human experience, collaboration, right? All about leadership and culture, the values of the organization, developing our talent. And then down in process and precision, systems, our systems, the data input, repetitive tasks, admin, documentation, all the important things to run the systems. Well, as we know, people also live in these quadrants, right? People are coming at these things from these perspectives. Now, if we look at the capabilities of AI right now, AI is doing a lot of the things in this bottom half really well. And if those trends continue, AI is going to continue to really dominate that bottom half, which pushes our human value up into that top half. What does this mean? Right? This is one example of a situation that as leaders, we're going to be faced to get curious about, start asking some questions, right? If my work is in the bottom half, which actually a lot of our work, right, in CPA and audit and financial, it is in the bottom half. If my work is in the bottom half, if my team's work is in the bottom half, what does that mean? How do we need to evolve? How does the value we bring change? How can I leverage AI to enable and accelerate the top half, right? How do we use AI to help accelerate the vision, to help expand and accelerate expansion opportunities? How do I drive a culture of adoption and innovation, right? Particularly if I have people who aren't necessarily wired for that. How do I drive that so my team stays competitive, we don't fall behind? And how do I coach up the bottom half, right? If AI is going to start to really continue to accelerate in that, how do I coach up? How do I really coach and develop that bottom half? Now look, this is a discussion for another day. We're not going to solve this today, but it's all about really understanding situations that we're faced with, and getting curious and asking the right questions is certainly a good starting point. The other piece is really understanding what's our level of control in every situation that we're looking at, because as leaders, again, we're faced with a ton of different situations, and how do we prioritize kind of where we focus our time and energy? These are the three concentric circles of influence. And if you look at that outside circle, this is concern. These are things that we don't have direct control over, but they impact us or are concerning in some way. So again, in the AI example of a situation, we may not have any control over the tech advancements and that timing of the advancements of tech and AI, right? But it impacts us. Now, if we move further in, we move into influence. These are things that we don't have direct control over, but we may have indirect ability to influence. So again, in the AI example, maybe we don't determine what our firm's policy is going to be on AI, but we may be able to indirectly influence that based on our own knowledge and supporting whatever direction we think we need to go. And then as we move further in, then we've got our control. This is just the one little space we have direct control over to change, right? So again, in the AI example, it may be I have direct power over how I'm going to utilize AI or how maybe my team is going to utilize AI. The main point here is that we can spin our wheels, our precious energy, our precious resources in every area of this, okay? Women in particular, man, we tend to stay up late at night. We tend to get those wheels turning. We tend to worry about a lot of things up in concern. We don't have any ability there to influence that and impact that. So how can we really grasp what our level of control is to be able to focus our precious time and resources in the areas where we have more direct control? And when we can start to, really any situation that you're faced with, start to plot it on this. Just get a better sense of what is my direct control here. Because the more you grasp that, the more you really get your arms around that, the more your team can start to understand and believe, right, that you clearly grasp the situation, that you have a good read on what is happening. So we have to build trust to be able to lead people. Right? Without trust is the foundation of everything. We cannot lead unless people trust us first. And we do that through understanding self, showing our authentic selves. We do that through empathy, through understanding others. And we do that through logic, through really understanding the situation. Leadership is not a title. It's not even really a job. I think leadership is legacy. And that word legacy, it's so grandiose, but I like to just think of legacy as how we show up. How do we choose to show up every day? Whipley has gifted you all a copy of my book, Big Fish, and Big Fish is all about personal branding, and I think it will resonate with a lot of you in this room, but really it's about legacy. And the reason you're here today, the reason you're improving yourself and want to be a better leader, and all the speakers that you're going to hear from today, it's about legacy. What is the impact that you're having on your people, on those around you? I was listening to a podcast the other day, and this quote stuck out to me. Fostering hope and joy in others is our greatest spiritual calling. Now, I'm not going to go spiritual on you here at the end. And funny that this is from Rainn Wilson, who played Dwight in The Office. It's like the epitome of the horrible workforce. But fostering hope and joy in others, that's leadership, right? That is authentic leadership. And people data can be your superpower, but how are you going to use it to foster hope and joy in others? Put a Post-it note on your computer, write this on your mirror, so that when we get swept up in the busyness of the day-to-day and all of the to-dos, which we all have to do, right? We have things we've got to execute, we have things we have to do, But this is the most important. How am I going to foster hope and joy in others? And let's make a commitment to each other in this room today that we're not going to go back on Monday just to the same status quo and continue going with the flow that's producing these horrible statistics we're looking at. Let's be the cycle breakers. Now, I'm going to be here all day. I'm sitting at table 25, and I'm there to sign books, to answer questions about your PI, to dig into any of this, and this is a QR code to book time with me. I sincerely hope to continue the conversation with every single one of you in this room. All right, let's break the cycle. I'm Caroline Nuttall. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.